I have been a paramedic in New Orleans for 9 years. I have worked through 4 hurricane seasons, 2 major flood events, and more tropical storms than I can count. I have pulled people out of attics and off rooftops. I have waded through chest-deep water on streets I drive every day. I have seen this city take a beating and come back to life every single time, because that is what New Orleans does. It floods and it suffers and it dries out and it keeps going. The people here understand water. We live with it. We live below it, technically. The whole city sits in a bowl between the river and the lake. And every person who calls this place home has made a kind of peace with the fact that the water is always there, always pressing in, always waiting for the pumps to fail, or the levees to overtop, or the sky to open up and remind us that we built a city where a city probably should not be. My name is Corey Thibodeau. I am 33 years old. I was born in Houma, Cajun on my mother's side, and I have lived in New Orleans since I was 24. My house is a raised shotgun in the bywater, up on piers the way the old houses are, with the living space about 4 feet above street level. That elevation has saved me more than once. When the water rises, it pools in the street and under my house, but does not reach my floor. I can sit on my front porch and watch the neighborhood become a canal and know that I am dry, at least for a while. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that I am not a person who panics during storms. I have seen the worst this city can do. I have worked through nights that would break most people. I know how hurricanes work, how floods behave, how the city responds and recovers. None of what I am about to describe fits into anything I know. Hurricane Luelle made landfall on a Wednesday evening in mid-September, coming ashore just west of Grand Isle and tracking northeast across the marshes toward the city. It was a Category 3 at landfall, with sustained winds near 120 miles per hour and a storm surge that pushed up through Barataria Bay and into the canals and drainage systems that crisscross the southern parishes. By the time the eye wall reached New Orleans, around 8 that night, the wind was still gusting past 90, and the rain was falling so hard that it sounded like gravel pouring onto my roof. I had been hunkered down since early afternoon. My go-bag was packed by the door. I had filled my bathtub with water and stocked my kitchen with enough food for 3 days. My battery-powered radio was tuned to the local emergency frequency. My phone was charged, though cell service had gone out around 6 and had not come back. The power had failed at 7. I sat in my living room with a lantern and listened to the storm, tried to dismantle my house one gust at a time. Around 10, the wind began to taper. Not all at once. It came in stages, the gusts spacing out, the sustained roar dropping to a moan, and then to something that was almost quiet. The rain slowed from a downpour to a drizzle, and then stopped. The pressure in my ears shifted. The storm was moving northeast, dragging its worst weather away from the city. I stepped out onto my front porch and looked at my neighborhood. The street was gone. In its place was a flat, black expanse of water, 2 or 3 feet deep, perfectly still, stretching in both directions as far as I could see in the darkness. Every house on my block was dark. Every street light was dead. The only light anywhere was my flashlight beam. cutting a narrow white tunnel through air that was thick and warm and smelled like salt water and mud and torn leaves. I turned the flashlight off and stood in the dark and listened. After a major storm, the city usually starts making noise almost immediately. Generators coughing to life behind houses, dogs barking, people calling out to each other, checking on neighbors, assessing damage. The city takes a hit and it gets back up and it makes noise about it, because that is what living things do. But that night, the silence was total. I stood on my porch for 5 minutes and heard nothing. No generators, no dogs, no voices, no insects, which should have been deafening in September in New Orleans. The air thick with mosquitoes and crickets and tree frogs. Nothing. The air was warm and wet and absolutely still, and the silence was the heaviest thing I have ever felt, heavier than the storm itself. I went back inside and turned on the radio. The local station was running emergency broadcasts from the city's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. The message was standard post-hurricane protocol, the same kind of advisory I had heard a dozen times before. A curfew was in effect for all of Orleans Parish. Residents were advised to remain in their homes until daylight. Do not attempt to drive. Do not wade through floodwater. Emergency crews were staging at designated locations and would begin deployment at first light. The message repeated on a loop, the same automated voice cycling through the same instructions every 3 minutes. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I knew the drill. Stay inside, wait for dawn. Let the professionals handle it. In 12 hours, the sun would be up and the water would start receding, and the city would begin the long, exhausting process of cleaning up. I had been through this before. Around 11, the radio cut out mid-sentence. The automated voice stopped. There was a burst of static, and then the EAS tones came through. That harsh, buzzing sequence that every American recognizes, the sound that means something official and urgent is about to be said. 3 long tones, then the digital header, then the voice. But this time, the message was different. Attention. This is a civil emergency message from the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. All residents within Orleans Parish are ordered to remain inside their homes. Do not open doors or windows. Do not respond to any sounds from outside your home. Do not attempt to make visual contact with anything in the floodwater. This order is in effect until further notice. The message repeated. I listened to it 3 times. I have heard dozens of emergency alerts over my 9 years as a paramedic in this city. The language is always specific and practical. Shelter in place. Boil water advisory. Avoid downed power lines. The instructions are rooted in real, identifiable hazards, and they tell you what the hazard is so you understand why you are being told to do something. This message did not identify a hazard. It told me not to look at the water. It told me not to respond to sounds. That is not emergency management language. Emergency management does not tell you to ignore people who might need help. That is the opposite of everything the system is designed to do. I stood up and walked to my front window. The street was still a flat black mirror of floodwater. Nothing moved in it. Nothing moved anywhere. The silence was exactly as heavy as it had been an hour ago. I went back to my chair and sat down and waited for clarification that did not come. Sometime after midnight, I heard the first sound from outside. A splash. Not the random settling of floodwater. Not a piece of debris sliding off a roof. A deliberate splash, followed by another and another. Rhythmic, sustained. The sound of something wading through the water in the street. Slowly, patiently, step by step. I went to the front window. Through the glass, in the absolute darkness, I could see nothing. My porch was maybe 10 feet from the street. Whatever was making the sound was close, no more than 20 or 30 feet from where I stood. I picked up my flashlight and my thumb found the switch. Then I stopped. The emergency alert had told me not to make visual contact with anything in the water. I did not know why I took that instruction seriously. I am a paramedic. My entire career is built on going toward the sound of distress, not hiding from it, but something about the quality of that splashing, the deliberate, unhurried patience of it, made me set the flashlight down on the windowsill without turning it on. The splashing continued. It moved slowly down my street from east to west. Not hurried, not frantic. A steady pace, like someone walking through knee-deep water with nowhere particular to be. It passed directly in front of my house. I could hear the displacement of water, the soft drag of movement through the flood. Whatever it was large. The splashes were heavy, deep, not the quick, light steps of a person wading carefully. These were the sounds of something that did not need to be careful. It continued past my house and faded as it moved west toward the river. Then, from somewhere in the next block, I heard a voice. A woman. She was calling for help. Not screaming, not crying. Speaking at a normal conversational volume, calm and clear, as if she were standing in the flooded street and politely asking if anyone was around. Hello, please, I need help. Is anyone home? My hands gripped the arms of my chair. Every part of my training told me to move. Somebody was in the water, possibly injured, possibly disoriented, possibly an elderly resident who had tried to leave and gotten stranded. I should open my door. I should call out. I should wade into the street and find her and help her, because that is what I do. That is who I am. But the voice was wrong. I could not identify exactly what was wrong with it at first. The words were correct. The tone was appropriate for someone asking for help. But there was something missing from it. An absence. Like a song played on an instrument that is perfectly in tune, but has no resonance. The woman's voice had no fear in it, no urgency, no emotion at all, really. It was flat and measured and patient, and it repeated the same phrases at the same intervals. And it did not change. A person in genuine distress escalates. Their voice rises. They become more desperate as time passes and no help comes. This voice stayed exactly the same, minute after minute, as if the thing producing it had learned the words for a distress call, but did not understand what distress actually felt like. The voice moved through the neighborhood for several minutes. I could track its position by sound. It drifted east, then south, then came back west. It called from different distances, but always at the same volume, the same tone, the same calm and empty patience. Then the outdoor warning sirens activated, the ones mounted on poles throughout the city. Tall speakers designed to reach entire neighborhoods with tornado warnings and hurricane advisories. In the dead silence of the powerless city, the siren was staggering. It rolled across the flooded streets and echoed off the shotgun houses and the old warehouses and came back doubled and tripled on itself. The tone cycled once, twice, and then the automated voice came through the speakers, loud enough that I could hear it clearly through my closed windows and walls. Attention. Do not leave your homes. Do not open your doors. Something is in the water. Do not look at it. Do not speak to it. Do not respond to any voice you hear outside your home. Remain inside and remain silent until you receive further instruction. I sat very still and felt the hair on my arms rise. Something is in the water. Not someone. Something. The city's Emergency Operations Center, staffed by trained professionals who choose every word of every broadcast with deliberate care, had just told the entire population of New Orleans that something was in the floodwater and that they should hide from it. The woman's voice outside stopped. The splashing stopped. The siren faded and the silence returned. And this time the silence had a texture to it, a density, like the air itself was holding its breath. Around 1:30, I heard Gideon. Gideon Arsenault lived in the house next to mine. He was in his mid-60s, a retired longshoreman who had lived in the bywater his entire life. I knew him well. We shared beers on each other's porches. We watched Saints games through his front window when the weather was bad. He had a voice like a bass drum, deep and warm, and a laugh that carried halfway down the block. I would know his voice anywhere. I heard his front door open. The creak of his screen door was unmistakable. I had heard that creak 1,000 times. Then Gideon's voice, calling out into the dark. He sounded like himself, calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had weathered 50 years of storms in this city and was not about to let one more rattle him. He said he heard somebody out there asking for help. He said he was going to come see if they were all right. I went to my window. I wanted to shout to him, "Go back inside, Gideon. Shut your door. Did you not hear the sirens?" But the alert had told me to remain silent. Do not respond to any sounds from outside. And I did not know if the instruction was meant to protect me from the things in the water or to protect me from drawing their attention. And in that moment of uncertainty, I chose silence. I will carry that choice for the rest of my life. I heard Gideon's footsteps on his porch, heavy, familiar, the sound of his old work boots on the wooden boards, then the sound of him descending his front steps into the floodwater. 1 step, 2, 3. The water was about 2.5 feet deep at street level. I heard it rise around his legs, the soft displacement of a large man wading into a flood. He called out again. His voice was friendly, unconcerned. He said, "Somebody out here need help. I'm coming to you. Just hold on." Then silence. Not the silence of someone wading away and fading out of earshot. An instantaneous silence. Between one syllable and the next, the sound of Gideon Arsenault ceased to exist. There was no splash of a fall, no gasp of surprise, no struggle, no gurgle, no sound of a body going under. The audio of him simply stopped, as cleanly and completely as if someone had cut a wire. I pressed my face against the window glass. I could not see anything. The darkness was total and impenetrable, and the floodwater was a flat black void that swallowed my reflection and gave nothing back. I listened for 5 minutes, 10, 20. No sound of Gideon returning, no footsteps on his porch, no creak of his screen door closing. His door remained open. I could hear it shifting faintly in the residual breeze, the small familiar sound of it swinging on its hinges, back and forth, over an empty porch. I picked up my radio. The emergency broadcast had changed. Attention. We are aware that some residents have exited their homes. If you have remained inside, continue to do so. Do not attempt to locate or assist anyone who has gone outside. They cannot be helped. Remain inside. Do not make noise. This advisory remains in effect. They cannot be helped. Not they will be reached by emergency crews. Not stay inside and let first responders handle it. They cannot be helped. Present tense. Definitive. Final. The city's emergency management had just written off everyone who had opened their door, and they had done it in the flat, measured tone of people who had learned something terrible and were trying to communicate it without causing a panic. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, the sounds outside multiplied. The single voice that had been calling for help earlier in the night was joined by others. I heard them at various distances throughout the neighborhood. Some close, just beyond my porch. Some blocks away, drifting faintly through the warm, still air. All of them were calm. All of them were measured. All of them were asking for help in that same flat, emotionless way, cycling through the same phrases with the same patient rhythm. Hello, please, I need help. Can someone hear me? Will you open the door? And I began to recognize some of them. One of the voices was Gideon's. I heard him in the street directly in front of my house. That deep, unmistakable bass. He was saying the same things the other voices were saying. Hello, please, I need help. Is anyone home? The words were his. The voice was his. But everything that made it belong to Gideon Arsenault was gone. There was no warmth in it, no personality. No trace of the man who laughed too loud and told the same fishing stories every summer and called me brother when he had enough beer in him. It was Gideon's voice played through an empty room, a perfect copy with nothing behind it. More voices joined as the hours passed. A child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, calling for its mother in a small, clear voice that had no fear in it. An elderly man asking politely if someone would open the door. He sounded like he was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. A younger woman repeating the same phrase in a loop. Help me please, help me please, help me please. She said it the way you might recite a line you had memorized for a school play, hitting every word correctly, but understanding none of them. The splashing returned. Not one source now, multiple. Several things moving through the water simultaneously, slowly, patiently, wading through the flooded streets of the bywater as if they were walking through a garden. They stopped in front of houses. I could hear them pause, the water settling around them, and then one of the voices would call out. Each house received its own appeal. Each voice was tailored, as if whatever was in the water could sense who was inside each house and knew which voice to use, which name to call, Which version of human distress would be most likely to make someone open their door? They stopped in front of my house at least 3 times. Each time, a different voice called out. The first was the woman from earlier. The second was the child. The third time, just before 4 in the morning, a voice I did not recognize said my name. "Corey, please let me in. The water is cold." I pressed my back against the interior wall, as far from the windows and doors as I could get, and I put my hands over my ears. I am not ashamed to say that. I have pulled car crash victims out of wreckage. I have done CPR on children. I have walked into houses where terrible things had happened, and I did my job and I kept my composure. But sitting in that dark house, listening to something in the water say my name in a voice that was not quite human, in a tone that was not quite right, I covered my ears like a child hiding from a thunderstorm, and I prayed for sunrise. The outdoor sirens activated one more time, around 4:30. The message had changed again. Attention. Sunrise is in approximately 90 minutes. Water levels are expected to recede by midday. You must remain inside your home until the floodwater has fully receded from your street. Whatever you hear, whatever voice you recognize, do not open your door. The things in the water are not the people they sound like. Remain inside. We will get through this. We will get through this. That sentence broke me in a way the rest of the night had not. Because it was not a directive. It was not policy language or emergency protocol. It was reassurance. It was someone sitting in the emergency operations center, broadcasting to a city full of people hiding in the dark, and that someone was afraid, and they were not hiding it anymore. They were holding it together just enough to keep the broadcasts going, and the best they could offer was a sentence that sounded like something you whisper to yourself when you do not believe it. The sky began to lighten around 6. The grey came slowly, leaching into the darkness from the east, turning the black water in the street to a dark pewter and then to a muddy brown. I watched it from my window. I had not slept. I had not moved from my position against the interior wall for nearly 2 hours. As the light grew, the voices stopped. Not gradually, all at once. Between one breath and the next, every sound outside ceased. The splashing stopped. The calling stopped. The patient, empty voices that had circled my house all night went silent, as if a switch had been thrown. I waited another 30 minutes. Then I went to the front window and looked at my street. The floodwater was still there, 2 feet of murky brown water covering the road and the sidewalks. Debris floated in it. Branches, plastic bags, shingles, a cooler from someone's porch. Normal post-hurricane wreckage, the kind of mess I'd seen after every major storm. But in the water, I could see disturbances in the layer of fine sediment that had settled on the submerged pavement. Tracks. Not footprints exactly, but impressions. Roughly oval, each one about 2 feet long, pressed into the mud beneath the water in slow, deliberate lines. They ran along both sides of the street. They trailed from house to house. And at the base of the front steps of several homes on my block, the tracks stopped, clustered together in groups, as if something had stood there for a long time, facing the door, waiting. At Gideon's house, the front door was still open. The screen door hung loose on one hinge. The tracks led up to his front steps, and then back out into the street and away. Inside the house, through the open doorway, I could see his living room, his chair, his lamp, his television, everything in place, everything untouched. And Gideon was gone. Not in his house, not on his porch, not floating in the water. Gone the way a person is gone when the world simply closes over the space they occupied and leaves nothing behind. Around 7, the emergency sirens sounded one final time. Attention! Residents may begin exiting their homes. The overnight advisory has been lifted. Exercise caution around standing water. Emergency crews are now deploying for welfare checks and damage assessment. If you are aware of anyone who exited their home during the overnight hours, please report their last known location to the nearest emergency personnel. Do not enter any home that was found with its doors open. Do not enter any home that was found with its doors open. Delivered in the same flat, automated tone as everything else. A simple instruction buried at the end of a standard-sounding post-storm advisory. And it was the most frightening thing I heard all night. I waded out into the street that morning. The water was warm and brown and came up to my knees. I was one of the first people outside on my block. A few neighbors emerged from their houses within minutes of the all clear, stepping onto their porches and then down into the water, blinking, exhausted, looking at each other with the expression of people who had all survived something together and did not know how to talk about it. Nobody mentioned the voices. I looked at the woman across the street, a nurse named Lorraine, who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. She met my eyes and I could see that she had heard everything I had heard. She knew. She had sat in her dark house all night and listened to the things in the water call to her. And she had not opened her door, but she did not speak about it. She looked at Gideon's open front door, and then she looked away, and she began picking debris out of the water in front of her steps as if it were any other morning after any other storm. Nobody asked about Gideon. Not that morning. Not that week. His name came up in the official welfare checks as a resident unaccounted for. The report said he was believed to have been swept away by floodwater. It was not a remarkable entry. People are lost in floods. It happens every hurricane season. There was nothing in the report about the circumstances, nothing about the voices or the sirens or the instructions not to open doors, just a name and an address and the word unaccounted. In the days that followed, as the water receded and the power came back on and the city began its familiar process of recovery, I talked to people, not about what I had heard. I could not bring myself to say it out loud yet, but I asked questions carefully, the way you ask about something you are not sure the other person wants to discuss. I asked older residents of the bywater and the lower 9th and Trime if they had ever heard of anything like what happened that night. They had. An old man in Trime, a retired carpenter in his late 70s, told me without any surprise in his voice that the things in the water have always come after the big storms. His grandmother told him about them. She called them the drowned ones, though she did not believe they were actually drowned. She believed they lived in the water itself, in the deep places beneath the city, in the underground rivers and the flooded foundations and the waterlogged soil that holds New Orleans up. When the storms come and the water rises above the streets, the boundary between their world and ours disappears. The floodwater is not just water, it is a door. He told me every generation of people who have lived in this city has known. Not everyone, not in any official way. There is nothing written down, no record, no acknowledged history. But the knowledge passes from grandparent to grandchild in the same way that knowledge about how to cook a roux or how to read the sky before a storm passes, quietly, without ceremony, as a fact of life in a city that was built on soft ground over a swamp that was never meant to hold anything permanent. They call with stolen voices, the old man said. They learn the sounds of the people above them. And when the water rises and the city goes dark, they walk the streets and they call at the doors and they wait. They are patient. They have been patient for a very long time. I asked him what they want. He looked at me with an expression that was not quite sad and not quite afraid. It was the expression of someone who lives with a truth that cannot be changed and has stopped trying to change it. He said, "They want us to come down." I went back to work 2 weeks later. The city was recovering. The water was gone. The power was back. The streets were full of debris trucks and insurance adjusters and the persistent, stubborn noise of a city rebuilding itself. It felt normal. It felt like every other post-hurricane recovery I had been part of. The routine helped. The work helped. The 12-hour shifts and the constant motion and the focus required to do my job pushed the memory of that night into a place where I could almost ignore it during the day. At night was harder. I was running a shift on a Tuesday evening in early October, about 3 weeks after Luell. Routine calls, a chest pain in Algiers, a fall in the Marigny, the kind of work that fills a shift without drama. Around 9, we were dispatched to a welfare check in the lower 9th ward. An elderly resident had not been seen in several days. We drove through the neighborhood in the dark, the ambulance headlights cutting through a light rain that had been falling since afternoon. And as we turned onto the residential street where the call was located, the radio squawked. The EAS tones came through, that harsh, familiar buzz. A tropical storm had formed in the Gulf of Mexico. It was expected to strengthen over the next 48 hours. The projected track brought it to the Louisiana coast within 72 hours. Residents in coastal and low-lying parishes were advised to begin preparations. I stopped listening to the details of the advisory because I was looking at something in the street ahead of my ambulance. At the far edge of my headlights, maybe 60 yards ahead, something stood in the road. The rain was light, just a drizzle, and the street had maybe 2 or 3 inches of water on it. Normal rainwater, not floodwater. Not deep enough to wade through, barely enough to cover your shoes. But something stood in it. I saw it for maybe 2 seconds, tall, still, facing me, not moving, just standing in 3 inches of water on a residential street in the lower 9th ward, as if it had been waiting there long before my headlights found it. My headlights flickered, just for an instant, a half-second interruption that could have been a loose connection or a voltage fluctuation or nothing at all. And when the light steadied, the street was empty. The rain fell on wet pavement and shallow puddles, and there was nothing standing in the road and nothing moving and no sound except the rain and the idling engine and the EAS tones still cycling on the radio. My partner looked at me and asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine. I put the ambulance in gear and drove to the call. But I watched the water the rest of the night. I watched it run along the gutters and pool in the low spots and gather in the places where the drainage is poor, which is most of the city. I watched it rise, inch by inch, in the way that water always rises in New Orleans when the rain falls long enough. And I thought about what the old man in Tremé had told me, that the floodwater is not just water, that it is a door. Another storm is coming. They always come. This is New Orleans, and the Gulf is warm and the season runs through November, and the water is always waiting to rise. I still live in the bywater. I still work nights. And every time it rains hard enough for the water to cover the street, I close my windows and lock my door and turn off my lights, and I sit in the dark and I listen. Most nights, I hear nothing but the rain. But some nights, when the water is deep enough and the city is quiet enough, I hear footsteps in the street below my house. Slow, patient, unhurried, and a voice I recognize, a deep voice like a bass drum, warm and familiar, calling my name through the dark and asking me to open my door. And every night, so far, I have not opened it, so far.